Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mind Your Nest. I'm your host, Jennifer Rosen, and I'm excited today for my guest. Her name is Doreen Bridgman. She's a speech pathologist and certified brain health coach. And before we get started, and before Doreen introduces herself and talks about her business and what she does, I wanted to share this very appropriate story for my guest this morning. So I normally show up to record my podcast on Thursday morning every other week. And I normally like to get here about 9:15, 9:30. I like to come in, relax, unwind, get my head together. So I pull up outside Pixelworks, ready to grab all my stuff. And Janine comes out the door asking, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "We're recording, of course." Turns out I completely forgot to email Janine and put myself and Doreen on the calendar. And I have to say, I think I've already scheduled several guests through the end of August. So obviously, we really need to talk about brain health. And now, without further ado, welcome, Doreen.
Thank you. It's very nice
To be here. And for those of you that are listening from home, we're very color coordinated today. So when I post the picture to encourage everybody to listen to the show, we didn't really plan what we were going to wear this morning. So Doreen, I met you through the Chamber of Commerce. I believe we were at a nonprofit council meeting sometime either earlier this year or late last year. And we started chatting. I believe it was after the end of a speaker. And we started chatting, and then we started having phone conversations, getting to know each other a little bit more. I find what you do fascinating, really, especially being 57 and having ebbs and flows with my mental acuity and brain fog and whatnot. Can you describe what you do, what the name of your businesses are, and how you got there?
Sure. I tell people that I work with their greatest asset, which is their brain. In the cognitive coach, I work individually with people who have either been diagnosed with ADHD, experienced a concussion, or possibly a moderate or more severe brain injury. And I also have a certain group of people that are looking to expand and excel their cognitive skills to increase either their position at work, or they may be finding that there's transitions happening, lots of new learning. We all know with technology changes, we're constantly being in a position where we need to learn new information. In my other business, Brain Thrive Consulting, we provide online brain health courses. So right now we are focusing on chemo brain, and we've developed a 6-week online course for people who are experiencing either the long-term symptoms of chemo brain, or some of them are transient, but while you're still trying to work and take care of your home and your family, the use of strategies is really effective to help monitor and reduce your stress level. So we provide a little bit of self-confidence for people to feel like they can regain control while the fog may be just working its way out on its own.
That's fascinating, really. Two businesses serving and helping people with their brain health. But really, it sounds in two completely demographics in a way, all for the same purpose. How did you become interested in this?
So I always knew growing up I wanted to help people. Being a young child, I always thought I wanted to be a nurse. And then I realized I could never give anybody a needle. So I had to rethink that. And I actually was introduced to the brain trauma unit when I was teen by a friend of my mom's who said, I think you have the personality to work with people who have brain injuries, because I tend to be very low key, calm. I have a lot of patience. And so I went for a tour, and I was struck by the pictures in people's rooms of their life before their injury. And I had never heard of brain injury. I understood congenital brain issues, but I'd never been introduced or never heard about somebody whose life was going perfectly, and then they were in a car accident and everything turned around.
Wow, that's so insightful at such a young age. So what'd you do after that?
So I really never left the field. I started out as an aide on the brain trauma unit, and brain health is huge right now. Everybody's talking about it. When I was 19, nobody was talking about it.
Did you, I'm sorry for interrupting, did your parents, your grandparents, did anyone in your immediate or extended family have any issues with brain trauma at that
No,
time?
I had suffered 2 concussions as a soccer player in high school.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And my father was ahead of the time because after the second one, I had 2 concussions within 3 weeks. And he said,
Wow.
that's it, you're not playing anymore. Back then, you had a concussion, your bell got wrong, you saw stars, you got up and
Yeah.
you continued to play. It's like, what do you mean I'm not playing anymore? And he had apparently had a young cousin who had passed away at a very young age. And after he passed away, they found that he had been playing underneath their kitchen sink and hitting his head repeatedly
Oh my
on the
gosh.
pipes. And that's what caused his death. So he said, you're not playing. You had 2 concussions in a short period of time. Devastated. I was going into my senior year and I couldn't play anymore. And I really liked being part of a team. I was never the greatest soccer player, but I liked the camaraderie. So I was like, okay. And then I ended up walking onto the brain trauma unit feeling, wow, okay, now I understood why he told me I couldn't play any longer. And it's really exciting though when you see somebody emerging from coma. It's also very scary when somebody doesn't. So even as a 19-year-old, it was extremely impactful to recognize that, wow, your life could be whatever. There were adults in there who had full careers, families. We had one summer where we had 3 teenagers under the age of 20, and that was really difficult.
Wow. And were they in there because they suffered trauma like you did during soccer?
Their injuries were more significant. They were in motor vehicle accidents. I had a very short loss of consciousness. They were in coma.
And what was that like? Can you give me an idea of the patients that came out of coma in a positive way, and then the patient that came out not in not such a great way?
So we would have, because I wasn't fully licensed or anything, I was trained to do coma stim. So I would go into the rooms with people in coma 3 times a day, and we would do olfactory, we would do sensory, we would do auditory, and just watch for any level of response. And there was one woman that I remember clearly when she started to emerge from coma. Every 24 hours, she was becoming more and more responsive.
Oh my gosh.
And within about 10 days, she was then able to carry on a full conversation.
So what was that like when you were there? Number one, were you by yourself? Number two, can you go into a little bit more detail of what those 3 items were and what those mean?
So you would have a checklist of what you were looking for. So if you had seen any level of response. And the nice thing about being on the unit was everybody worked as a team. So there were physical therapists, speech therapists, occupational therapists, nursing, and we would vary the protocols so that if somebody saw something, we wanted to make sure it was repeated by somebody else. So olfactory, you had these little bottles of smells. And again, things have come a very long way since back then.
I'm sure we'll get there.
And so you would put it under their nose and see if there was any response.
Oh.
Yeah, so it was considered consistent vegetative state. And then we would do things like call their name. We would ask family members to bring in some of their favorite music. So we would put their music on to see if they would respond in any way. And then you would do sensory. So you would touch their feet, touch their hands, do a little bit of a pinch, see if they pulled away at all. And again, you were watching for if you saw their eye blink, even though their eyes were closed, but you could tell that maybe they were blinking more, you'd watch for any kind of a response.
So what was that like as not even a young adult when you finally saw a response? How did you feel?
It was really exciting. We had one young woman, when she emerged, we gave her a communication board and she spelled out to her parents, "I love you." Like everybody on the unit cried.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
You saw those signs of hope, which kept you motivated to keep going in day after day because you didn't know. Now there's more science behind who they believe will come out, and you're able to monitor so much more. We were just basically doing it from a checklist.
Oh my goodness. And what was it like for the other patient where you didn't have those uplifting results?
So that the family was the most difficult because the family members would come in day after day hoping to see some change. And what would happen is if somebody was on the unit for 8 to 10 weeks and there was no change, then the discussion would start about them being moved to what was called the extended recovery unit. And that was like a step down unit. Our unit was more of an active rehabilitation unit where we expected people to make progress. The extended recovery unit was just, you knew that the progress was going to take much longer and that there was a chance they may not be coming out of that vegetative state. So they had like in-servicing. It was interesting, about every other week for the full-time staff. But because I was only a rehab aide, I wasn't included in that piece of it. The therapists themselves were very supportive because the average burnout at that time was nobody was really in the field longer than about 7 years.
And how did you manage those emotions and the feeling, let's say after you were done working or after a really tough case? How did you deal with that?
Pretty similar to how I deal with it today. I've always been an avid person who likes to exercise, and so that is my primary stress reliever. I love to ride my bike before work. It clears my head. Now I incorporate I do more strength training. I will do yoga. But back then it was mostly bike riding.
Okay, so let's talk about a little bit. We were talking before we started about your grandfather. If you can give a little bit of the story, it's very interesting.
So my grandfather immigrated from Italy, came over when he was 18 and worked his whole life, opened up a florist. I think he was in his 50s when he did that, and lived to be 94.
Amazing.
Kept himself very mentally active. Once he retired, he would do those model boats, the really intricate ones. Was always socially active, went to senior citizens. But when I look at his nutrition, he followed what would be considered the Mediterranean diet today, except his fat intake was far greater. But he obviously genetically was not prone to, he didn't have high blood pressure, didn't have cardiovascular disease, but he did lose his sight, which I think really helped to expedite his cognitive decline.
And how old were you when he passed away and got into the field that you're in and you started growing your business? How did that impact you?
So I was 28, I believe, when he passed away. And I've always incorporated stress management, nutrition, sleep into the work that I do with people. It didn't make any sense that you wouldn't encourage somebody who is trying to recover from something to do those same things.
Right.
Now the science really just, it's got like an exclamation point on it. Like, hey, people, let's do this because you really can slow down the aging process.
Yep. It's very interesting. I think back to, for example, when my grandmas gave birth. I think they were in the hospital for 2 weeks. Back then, they could smoke cigarettes, and 2 weeks, it sounds like a vacation. You're in the hospital, somebody's taking care of your baby. And then fast forward to when I had my kids 21 and 23 years ago, where I'm in and out in less than 48 hours. And I understand the methodology of that for a myriad of reasons, insurance, whatnot. It wasn't cost effective any longer. However, on the flip side, you got to get up and go and start living your life and start doing the job of being a mom, even though there are a lot of moms, not myself included, who could have really used that extra time depending on what their story was and their health before, during, and after giving birth. So I do understand that there are always extenuating circumstances. I understand the pace of getting you in, getting you out. Ultimately, you had a kid. It's time to be a mom and start raising your kids. Even with other forms of surgery, whether elective or non-elective, I have 2 kids. My daughter tore both of her ACLs on the soccer field. My son tore one of his on the basketball court. And those were much more arduous Sometimes when you're in and out of the hospital, depending on what the reason is, sometimes you really can't get up and go, especially with having those surgeries. But the encouragement of moving and doing the physical therapy along with the recovery, even though you might not want to, is really important, because the one thing that you don't want to do is lay on the couch while you're recovering, even though that's all you really want to do. So let's talk a little bit about how nutrition, diet, and exercise, and making some choices to really start taking little steps towards a better mind, body, spirit, wellness, and what you and I were just recently talking about, not feeling overwhelmed. Let's say you were a carnivore, and then somebody saying you have to switch to Mediterranean, which can be a little off-putting to some people. So how do you feel about that? And how do you encourage your patients to being open-minded and taking that first step?
So I think helping people understand what the connection is between what they're eating and how their brain is functioning is really important.
And how do you do that?
There's tons and tons of research out there now that talks about foods that cause inflammation. And I'll use my son as an example because, of course, because his mom does this for a living, she's the last person he's going to listen to. And just recently, he has started to really change his diet. And he said, I feel better than I have in 3 years.
And how old is he?
26. When I give him the encouragement of, that's great. It's all under your control. And I think it's very important for people to feel like they have control.
Yes.
When you tell somebody you have to do something, the hairs on the back of their neck stand up like, I don't have to do anything but die and pay taxes, right?
Right, exactly.
And I get that. I think that's also one of the reasons that I'm so interested in the work that I do, is because I help people regain control of their lives. So it's the same idea. When you teach people that, look, if your body is experiencing inflammation, your brain is not exempt from that.
Right.
And when your brain is inflamed, it will impact your ability to make decisions. It will impact your ability to pay attention. It impacts your ability to remember information. And so when you help somebody understand that and they go, oh, all right, you know what? I'm like, either I'm in school or I really am trying to get this promotion, or I'm finding that I have to spend an extra 2 hours a day at work because I'm just not as efficient. Maybe I'll try it. And then you gradually, like I do action plans with everybody or a personal development plan. And I'll say, all right, so let's look at the list of foods that are inflammatory. We'll say, let's pick one to remove from your diet and then put in a food that's anti-inflammatory. And then you just keep working that system. It may take them 6 months or a year, but you know what? If they're 30, they've got the next 40 to 50 years of their life to live.
Yep.
By doing it slowly, they experience success. And once they start to feel clearer, that's all the motivation they need. They don't have to say anything else.
How do you find out from a clinical perspective about the inflammation other than listening to your clients? Have your clients already had blood tests done? Have they gone through any testing? Do you provide that testing to really see from a scientific standpoint what their markers are?
So that would come from their primary care doctors.
Okay.
If somebody is working with me and they're obviously obese, again, you can just look at who's in front of you and recognize that they have to make some lifestyle choices. I do ask them if they're on medication. So if they're on blood pressure medication or cholesterol medication, those again are signs that they're likely inflamed. I always refer people back to their doctors. I think one of the frustrating things is that a lot of the primary care doctors don't talk enough about nutrition. And they don't talk about the importance of what are the food choices that somebody's making and on their overall health, which I think is why sometimes we have so many people on medication.
And I grew up in a family where we had salamis hanging in our laundry room. We had somebody that would deliver meats to us, I think, once a month. My dad would get up at midnight every night and make salami omelets because we had a dog. Her name was JJ. And when she was a puppy, she was in the kitchen, in the crate, and my dad felt bad. So he would say that he was keeping her company. Meantime, smelling up the whole house and he was probably in heaven at midnight. I've mentioned this before, but for this episode, my dad had a massive heart attack at the age of 47 at the Bears-Patriots game, and all the doctors who saved his life that day were at the game. My dad flatlined. It was amazing. He lived for 31 years with congestive heart failure. And I remember when I was a freshman in college, I just started University of Kansas. I went home 3 weeks after his heart attack, and I saw him, and he was always like this pillar. And he told me the story of how he was revived back to life. And he said that if he was going to go, he was going to go with a hot dog in one hand and a soda in the other, and that he would have died a happy man. And as his mind, that was how he was. And he was like that for the rest of the 31 years. We had a custom-made soda fountain that he had always wanted us to have in our house. I mean, he just wanted to eat one, and he did. And he had other medical situations for the rest of his 31 years, a couple open heart surgeries, a couple heart attacks, always being at the right place at the right time. One time, I think he was at almost every hospital in the state of Illinois. And he was at the hospital. They had to intubate him. He was very sick. And it really seemed like this time was going to be the end. But it wasn't, of course, because he always came out the other side. It wasn't his time. He wasn't ready, whatever the case may be. He did improve his nutritional life, but not really. But one thing that you had said that really hits home is when my dad was intubated, when I think he was at Loyola Medical Center in Chicago, we were talking to him, doing some of the things that you were talking about with your patients who were alive and in a coma. And I can't remember when it was, but it was one night he had his typical yellow pad of paper with a pencil, and he wrote on it, "Dying happy," underline, underline. And that was so powerful to me that he was aware, he knew, and he would have been okay if that was the last day of his life. But as I've said before, it wasn't. So obviously growing up, I had a pretty good diet. My mother would cook. We had Sunday night meals. With the soda fountain in our house, you could typically find me after school sitting on top of the soda fountain, not so much with a scooper and a bowl, but really a spoon. We had the 3-gallon tubs of ice cream. Chocolate chip was my dad's favorite. Of course, it was mine. And I was just sitting there with the spoon, gorging myself. And my mom would come home and see me. And she said, "Are you sure you don't want carrots and celery with a little bit of French dip?" Which obviously wasn't the healthiest. If you look on the ingredients of those packets, they're horrible for you. But it did take me a minute to switch and embrace a more nutritious lifestyle. And I've been eating pretty healthy for the majority of my life and have encouraged my kids to do so as well. One of the things that I have had done since I moved to Florida is I had a lot of this testing done, more so than your typical doctor's office where you're just getting your labs done. So I know this is a long-winded way for me to get there, but I completely agree with what you just talked about. When you go to the doctor, whether it's your internal medicine doctor or general practitioner, whoever you go to for your annual exam or follow-ups, that the labs are usually a given. They want to see where you're at. I genetically am predisposed to high cholesterol, thanks to my dad, and I've been on and off medication for many years. And I recently discovered, having a conversation with a nutritionist and a dietitian, that going on medication to treat your high cholesterol really is a Band-Aid, similar to I've always been on thyroid medication after the birth of my son, who's 23. I've been on Synthroid for about 23 years. And while I do appreciate Western medicine, I think especially going back all the years with my dad and my grandparents, I've come to understand and appreciate a more holistic approach to diet and nutrition as it relates to living a more clean life and ridding yourselves of some of the inflammation as well as cognitive impairment that can come from what we put in our body. Not only what we put in our body, but products that we use on our body, sprays that we use in our home, all of it. And I'm not saying, like you described, that today's Thursday and tomorrow is Friday. We have to get rid of everything and start replacing everything with non-toxic food, products in our home, detergent on our clothes, and all of that. I have so much respect and appreciation and have learned so much about really feeding our body, not because we're hungry and we want that quick fix, although, yes, there are times for that. I still do love my ice cream, but feeding our bodies in a more healthy, nutritionally focused way to aid some of our inflammation and other ailments that I guess we have had for many years.
Sure. So I'm going to back up a little bit. The research has shown now that our brains don't fully develop until we're 25. And at 30, they don't have to start the downward spiral that we had believed had happened. We used to think that the brain you were born with is the brain that you have and you can't make any change to it. Now they've identified neurogenesis, which is the birth of new neurons. And we are given new neurons on a daily basis. Some studies show that we get 700 new neurons in your hippocampus, which is your memory center. So my memory center, which is the area that generally shows deterioration first as we're aging, has 700 new neurons a day. Now, what we do to either nurture those neurons or kill them is part of our personal lifestyle choices. That's where the nutrition comes in. Eat the inflammatory foods, you're not going to nurture those new cells. Things like exercise, being physically active. If you think about our lifestyles now, most of us have to really insert physical activity. We don't even have to get up anymore to change the channel. There's no need to get up. We all carry a water bottle, so we don't have to go to the water fountain anymore, right? All those little ups and downs, which is like a little squat to sit up, get out of your seat and sit back down, we don't do. And I know for me, there are times that I could sit, because I do virtual sessions, I can be sitting at my computer for 5 hours straight and not move.
A long time.
I got a standing desk and I feel so much better at the end of the day when I alternate between sitting and standing. Just the circulation helps. I notice a change in the calorie count at the end of the day. And I just feel mentally clearer just from standing, because we're not meant to sit for extended periods of time.
I agree.
Your nutrition affects neurogenesis, but so does not eating just because you're hungry. When your body, when you feel hungry, you have to ask yourself, how long has it been since I ate? If I only ate 2 hours ago, I shouldn't, it's just my body's used to eating every 2 hours. If you extend that time, you can help promote neurogenesis. Chewing food actually helps promote neurogenesis.
Really?
We've all gone to the quick shakes. Our lifestyles are moving further and further away from how our brain and body was built and the things that we need to do for it. So there's sleep is huge.
Yep.
There's a lot of research now about, we all know that your muscles repair and it helps your immune system, but it also cleans out the toxins in your brain while you sleep. Your brain consolidates memory while you sleep. So for all the students that I have say, no, I gotta stay up the night before an exam, they're hurting themselves, and they'll say, but it doesn't work any other way because they don't know any other way.
Right.
So you have to help them build new habits. And we know new habits are difficult, right? Especially the older we get, the more that neuroplasticity, those pathways, they're put in place very sturdily. So your brain will prune out pathways that are no longer used, but that means you have to stop doing what you were doing. And so when you talk about, I do have a client, he's in his mid-50s, been talking to him about nutrition for about 2 years.
Wow.
When you're talking about brain health, it can take people a while to believe that, number one, they have the ability to make change, and number two, there's a need to make change. So he had a cardiac episode, which scared him to death. And he said, if I walk for 45 minutes for the next week, will I be okay? No. 45 minutes for the next 7 days is not going to undo what you've been doing for the last 25 years. So it was, he then took more of an interest in how do I start to change my habits? And then he got invested in the nutrition. So what can I take away? He started drinking more water, less coffee. Because again, people go get a coffee and it's 3 shots of this flavoring and it's all sugar.
Yep.
And sugar is the number one inflammatory food that people are ingesting now. And they don't even recognize how it makes them feel.
Yeah, that is very true. I typically shop the perimeter of any store, obviously going into some of the aisles to get, let's say, a clean marinara sauce. I don't make my own. Looking at labels, being a lot more of a partner in my own nutrition and not just grabbing historical purchases that I've made many years ago. I would imagine that it's challenging for some of your clients who really at some point don't want to look in the mirror and look at themselves and acknowledge that they are their own problem and they are their own solution. I've heard from a lot of people in my life, that's how I've always done it. This is how it was in our family. Just want to go along to get along and want to find a pill or a procedure or something to remedy those lifelong habits instead of doing the more difficult thing, which is to have an open mind and learn about newer, maybe more healthy ways to take those generational recipes and make them a little bit more clean. With this gentleman, was that something that he was open to?
So that's why it took the 2 years. There's a lot of education again about when you're used to doing, you've got a well-established habit, that's what your brain will automatically go to do. It doesn't even think about another option.
Right.
So you need to introduce the new options. And then I also spend a lot of time helping people understand that your brain does not think as clearly when it is inflamed. And again, inflammation doesn't have to mean I have a migraine. It's that constant state where your clarity of thinking is not where it can be. When I help people take a step back and I say, look at the decisions that you're making. So you've got this and this health issue, and then your food choices are this and this. If you were not talking about yourself, does that look like good decision making? And they can recognize that, no, it's not good decision making. And then we get into the discussion of, well, why do I keep making that decision? Part of it is habit. So those wires are connected. They fired enough times together. They've connected now. And I make the analogy of watering a new plant. You have to grow a new habit. And so sometimes I'll actually even have people go out and buy a plant, just like I need to do that for myself. And for most people, that helps them make the connection. And it's a constant reminder of, I need to do something different. Otherwise, I'm going to get the same result.
And how long for this gentleman, for example, is he your typical client?
He had his injury when he was very young. So his rehabilitation process is slower than somebody who had a more recent injury.
Okay. And how many years ago was his injury?
52.
Oh, wow. And how did he come to you?
When I lived in New Jersey, has what's called the TBI fund.
And what does that mean for our listeners?
That is a means of people paying for therapy that they would not otherwise have the ability to get.
Okay, wonderful. And how did this relationship start?
He was referred to me by a speech pathologist that I had worked with many years ago. She said to give me a call, and then I got him connected with the TBI fund so that he could have the funding in order to get the services.
Got it. And how was his demeanor and his condition when you first started, and how do you feel it is now?
So he had a lot of difficulty controlling his impulsivity. He had difficulty making decisions. He had some interpersonal communication difficulties. He'd have difficulty organizing his thoughts. He tended to be very defensive if somebody gave him feedback. Now his awareness of all of those issues is significantly increased. He uses a stop, think, and plan strategy, which is universal with most of the clients that I work with. I also give them the stop, breathe, and restart strategy when they feel like they're getting overwhelmed. So he's controlling the impulsive responses, which keeps him out of additional difficulty at work with the supervisor. He was having a lot of difficulty getting along with people. If anybody gave him feedback, he took it very personally, got very defensive, and it would start this negative spiral of an interaction.
That's amazing. Stop, think, and plan. I like that. I've used something that's it's not a 3-step, but I do at times, and I've encouraged my children over the years to envision a stop sign when they have ruminating thoughts, when they're spiraling, or they just can't get away from something. Close your eyes and envision a stop sign. How did you come up with that? Stop, think, and plan. I think that's great.
Impulsivity is one of the universal symptoms of a brain injury. And for most people, what you want to get them to do is to stop first before they respond to somebody immediately without thinking about how is it going to be perceived? Is that going to cause a problem, or is it going to create the solution that I'm looking for? So I actually do give everybody a stop sign.
I love that.
Because the stop, think, and plan, and also the stop, breathe, and restart strategy, information overload is something that everyone experiences. And if you have a brain injury, you're going to experience it faster. And that leads often to an impulsive response. So the stop sign is used for both the stop, think, and plan, and stop, breathe, and restart. So if you take 3 deep breaths early on, if you recognize overload immediately, you can control it. If you don't recognize it, it's going to continue to build, and then the break that you need is longer, and that's where it becomes really intrusive in people's days.
I think that's great. I personally, several years ago, when my kids were young, we had just moved from one suburb to the next. I've been on my own raising my kids for over 20 years, and I remember something happened, and I couldn't stop ruminating about this situation, and I just for some reason lost all control, or so I thought. And I was having a really difficult time for a couple of days, and I had my first 2 panic attacks. Never had a panic attack before. It was one of the scariest things I'd ever experienced in my life. And I remember my dear girlfriend, who's still one of my closest friends to this day, she's a social worker, and she said, "Jennifer, I want you to stop. I want you to take a few deep breaths, and I want you to get a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil." She said, "And I want you to write down 3 things." She said, "I want you to write down 3 things that you're going to do today. And I don't care if it's getting up, brushing your teeth, and taking a shower, but I want you to write down 3 things that you know you can do today. And I want you to think methodically and slowly and do those things. And every time that you feel like your brain and your mind starts ruminating, I want you to do that same exercise." And it's really amazing how the panic attack is this out of control feeling. The brain that you feel is completely detached from your head, and you don't have any control over it. If you slow down and are intentional and thoughtful, that you can control those thoughts, and you can redirect your mind, and you can have a different outcome other than potentially being hospitalized. But it definitely takes sometimes a helping hand, or somebody that is reaching out and asking you to hold on. Because when you're in the thick of it, it's really hard to reach your own hand and bring yourself out of it. Can we talk a little bit about the mental acuity that you had alluded to before with technology? I'm 57. I've never not worked. I've been in front of 2 screens for many years. And The last role that I had was probably one of the most intense for me as it related to my mental acuity and the overstimulation of technology. I've been in many different systems and implemented many different systems over my professional career. And this role I loved it. I was in human resources and payroll. I had to learn one new system that was somewhat archaic. It reminded me when I started working for ADP a few years after college. It reminded me of what the monitors used to look like, those big machines. And the screen was just, I don't know, looked like it was from the 1970s, I think. The colors weren't warm. You didn't know if you were to press enter or tab or whatever. But I have an open mind, and I thought to myself, you've done this before, no problem. And on the flip side, I was learning a different technology, a different software program that was robust and pretty and a web-based product. And you can just click and you were wherever you needed to be on that page in a split second. And it was two totally different systems that I was in every single day. My eyes were tired. My head was tired. I recall being a lot more aware of getting up, stepping away from the monitors and going for a walk, taking a breath, and doing what I could to recharge myself before I sat back down at those screens and kept working. And I have to say that I've never felt more exhausted during those 10 months that I worked for this company. The industry was exciting. I did get up and actually interact with human beings. I wasn't staring at two screens for 8+ hours a day, although it felt like it. Did feel like I was able to modify my day so that I had human interaction as well as being in front of the computer. And then human interaction, I'm a people person, and I love that. However, I did need to be dormant and sit in front of those two screens. And when I finally decided that it was time to leave the corporate world and to start my own thing, it took me time to decompress my eyes, my brain, and feel some sort of relief that I wasn't looking at two screens every day for 8+ hours a day. And I'm not a huge on my phone kind of person. I feel like it's a means to an end. Fortunately, I grew up in a time where there weren't cell phones. I remember when my dad got the first car phone and we thought we were really fancy. It was like, oh, you must be well off because you got one of those phones in your car. It had the coil, the cord. You had to have something put on top of your card. And it was like a real phone. You had those buttons you pressed, like my old princess phone. And I was so grateful for the time without screens. We had TVs where we had the dial. And back in the suburbs of Chicago, we had 2, 5, 7, 9, channel 11. And then channel 30, you had to get up, you had to turn the channel, you had to sit through the commercials. Watching commercials now, my 21 and 23-year-old are so annoyed at commercials. I don't know, I feel like it's entertainment, whatever. I'll get up, go to the restroom, grab water, something like that. I don't have the remote control crazy glue to my hand. So I've definitely embraced the robustness of technology, all the while realizing that my mental acuity is now on me to maintain. And your mental acuity, for some people, doesn't continue to accelerate once you're 57, 58, 59, whatever the case may be. And to keep up with technology seems a little overwhelming as technology is getting more and more robust. I'm glad I get to choose how much time every day I want to be in front of a screen. It does seem that the younger generation, including my 21 and 23-year-olds, were like born with screens in their hands, in front of their faces, in front of their eyes. I see families where everybody's on their screen at the table and nobody's having a conversation. I had someone in my family, they would give each one of their kids the iPad when we were out for dinner, when we were at family gatherings. And I'm grateful that my kids are old school. They're old souls like me. They know how to have conversations. However, I do find it just so disconcerting when you see so many people when you go out on their screens, and the nuance and the rawness of face-to-face communication and just being in the presence of other people having a conversation seems to be the exception for certain generations. So can you describe in your experience, I know we've talked about some older patients of yours, what your experience has been with younger patients and what you find with that demographic?
Sure. So I work with a lot of students who have ADHD.
Mhm.
So they are very prone to getting stuck on their phones. I definitely address the interpersonal communication skills. And it's interesting because it's not just the students with ADHD now. I think some of this was also accelerated by COVID,
Mhm.
but there's a lot of research that's showing that the adolescents don't have the ability to problem solve. They have difficulty compromising. They have more interpersonal conflicts. I think that's fueled both by social media, and there's an interesting trend in that some of the states are now starting to put in restrictions for some of the younger teens having social media accounts because, again, research is indicating it's not healthy for their brains. And I think when people try and separate mental health from brain health, you can't, because your mental health is your brain health.
Yes.
And so when we were looking at all these different pieces, you need to integrate them. You can't just ignore some of the science because it doesn't fit in with what your agenda is. iPads are great, right? When kids are 3 and it keeps them entertained, but you're not teaching them things like how to wait or what are the rules of society when you go out to dinner.
Yeah.
So some of that learning's not happening. Is it the kid's fault then when they're 13 and they don't know how to behave? If they never were guided or those limits were never taught to them, they're not going to just appear in their brain. And so we need to look at the whole picture. And socialization is also a huge part of brain health. So if you have 4 of these teenagers sitting at the same table, okay, it looks like they're socializing, but none of them are interacting.
They're either texting each other, they're on social media, they're posting, they're doing those selfies, which I really cannot stand. Seriously, I'm 57, but I might as well be 97 because you have 8 billion pictures of yourself with those stupid duck lips or whatever. And I just don't get it. I've said this, a couple times to my kids over the years that nobody really cares what you look like, where you are. Like, enough. Just go and live your life. Put your phone down. Put it in your pocket. Go outside. Have conversations. And living your life in front of a screen, just go and live your life quietly.
And they're all waiting for likes or comments. And then when they don't get them, then the self-doubt appears.
It's the comparison is the thief of joy. It's nobody cares. And if people do care, then that says something about them that maybe they're really not the right person to have in your life. I was on and off social media for a bit, got back on for my business and my podcast, but I don't really post about where I am, my trips, pictures of where I eat, or whatever. And that's just me personally. I like to live just a quiet life. I wasn't raised like that. So while I don't want to sound judgy for those that do, for me personally, I don't know. I just living under the radar, and at least it's worked for me thus far. So that must be a really challenging behavior change to have a conversation about with some of these young people, I would imagine.
Yeah, and one of the strategies that I give to a lot of my clients that are in their 20s who are working but are still attached very much to social media is to delete the app in the morning. And then they can put it back on their phone at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Because I have clients who are on social media 12 hours a day.
Yeah, that's a lot. That doesn't seem like a very healthy lifestyle. That doesn't seem like somebody that has any balance in their life.
No, 10 to 20 minutes out in nature Your brain is pre-wired to connect to nature.
Yep.
You will see a reduction in your stress level, your heart rate, your blood pressure, much better use of your time.
Yeah, I do believe that going outside with bare feet and walking in the grass or sitting outside, I love watering my plants and listening to the birds or whatever the case may be. And I find that maybe if I am home or one of my kids are around, that sometimes they'll come outside too. And without our phones, we'll sit in the backyard and it's actually really lovely. It brings back memories of when I was raised. Okay, Doreen, can you give us a couple of tips that you have shared with your clients that might help us as we open ourselves up to the idea of helping to eliminate brain fog and encouraging us to take care of our brain?
So I think the most important thing to know is that, again, the science is showing that neuroplasticity, which is your brain's ability to make new connections, goes on throughout your lifetime. So don't think that because I'm in my 50s or my 60s or my 70s, it's over. We can continue to help our brain health. And there is no more important organ in our body than our brain, because without it, we can't do anything. If you're going to think about making the investment, think about what your nutrition is. Are you sleeping? Make time to sleep, right? Your brain and your body both need it. Make sure that you are getting physical activity. It does not need to be in the gym. I always encourage people, do what you enjoy, because if going into the gym is not something you enjoy, it's only going to stress you out. And the next big pillar of brain health is stress management. So look at situations, people. Sometimes we have toxic people in our lives. We may need to set some limits and limit our exposure to them. If you feel like your job is really toxic, look at what you can do to change it. And if you don't have any ability to really make that change, then spend some time looking for another position. Again, spend time outside. Nature is very important, and it's just a natural stress reliever. And the other thing I would encourage people to do is, we live in a very fast-paced society. Everybody thinks that multitasking is the answer. It is not. Your brain works more efficiently when you're focusing on one thing at a time, and you can reduce overload that way. So what you need to recognize is when you're shifting back and forth, your brain is losing a little bit of information with each shift. That's what makes it less efficient. So use a time blocking strategy, allow yourself a full focus on what you're trying to do, and then move on to the next task.
I love that. And I'm not a fan of multitasking, and I'm so grateful that was the last tip that you gave us. Doreen, this has been such a pleasure. I am really grateful to know you, and I'm so thankful that we got to have this conversation, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Guests of Mind Your Nest, that's it for today. See you soon.